There are a lot of great videos out there discussing some of the more obscure aspects of Elden Ring's lore, but one topic that I feel hasn't really been explored that much is the Guardian Golems. And that is for good reason. There is next to no information about these automatons, and their item descriptions might be some of the shortest in the entire game. So in order to find out more about them, we'll need to pay attention to where they're located, in what state they're found, and ultimately we'll try to draw some conclusions as to the origins of these constructs. But real quick, before we get into the lore, don't forget to like the video. That should help it out a ton. Like I was saying, I feel like this topic is something that people are interested in, but just not that many content creators have really delved into it. So I hope this video helps, and I hope you all like it. Alright, let's get into it. The first Guardian Golem that most players will come across is the Golem on Stormhill. It's surrounded by a bunch of other golems that have fallen to pieces and are no longer functional. A common situation these golems end up in. If you approach the area and get close enough, the golem in the center will get up and attack you. On my first playthrough, I associated these golems with a large chunk of ruins that's found right here, but after examining the ruins, I've come to the conclusion that these ruins are probably from Farum Azula. You can see clear similarities in the carved stone reliefs on the side of the Farum Great Bridge and the Bestial Sanctum. But we'll come back to comparing architecture in a bit. This golem can drop the golem's halberd upon defeat. Its short item description reads, "A great halberd of black stone crafted by civilization, now gone to ruin, wielded by the Guardian Golem." This description is short, but there are two key bits of information here. One, the materials the halberd is made of, and two, the civilization that created it. So first off, we know the material their weapons are made of is black stone. Not too much, but we gotta take what we can get. We can reasonably assume that the Guardian Golems themselves are also crafted from this black stone. One bit of information here is that whatever civilization it was that crafted these golems is now gone, which is actually a fairly major clue. So, let's head over to the area underneath the Divine Bridge in Limgrave. Here, we see even more golems scattered around the area. Moving further along the underside of the bridge, golems are smashed to bits everywhere here. Plus another still functioning golem rises to challenge us when we get too close. It's fair to say that the golems found underneath the Divine Bridge probably fell off when the bridge was destroyed or collapsed and ended up down here. We'll come back to the Divine Bridge in a bit. For now, we're going to head over to one of my favorite dungeons in the whole game, and really it's the dungeon where my interest was piqued when it comes to the Guardian Golems, and that dungeon is the Highroad Cave. The Highroad Cave is found hidden away in the northern reaches of Limgrave, tucked along the banks of this river. The cave itself is very unique, as it's the only dungeon we see in-game that utilizes the specific kind of architecture we see inside, aside from one other dungeon, but we'll get to that in a bit. The architecture we find inside Highroad Cave is in the style of the arches and pillars we see along the cliff sides of Limgrave, Caelid, and the Mountaintops of the Giants. These pillars and arches are the signature style of one of the earliest civilizations that inhabited the lands between. It looks to me like the ruins found in this cave were constructed at the surface, and have been buried by centuries of geological processes. This cave descends quite a ways, and once we've made our way past the wolves and dead Khaiden mercenaries, we eventually come to a wide open cavern with a peculiar arrangement of architecture. The stone arches and pillars found here are arranged in a way that draws focus to the circular landing where the corpse is lying. This place must have been highly important, as it's wholly unique to this cave. When we eventually make it to the center of the circular landing, on the corpse we find one of the most important weapons in the game, lore-wise, and that weapon is the Shamshir. When we finally approach the boss arena for this dungeon, we enter a beautifully lit cavern, with shallow water and arched ruins embedding in the walls. The boss we are set to defeat is none other than a Guardian Golem. What remains of the smaller brickwork of these ruins may be smashed in our fight, and once we've defeated the Guardian Golem, the item we receive is a talisman, and it might be one of the most significant talismans in the game. That talisman is the Blue Dancer Charm, and its item description reads, "A cloth doll depicting a dancer garbed in blue, an ancient heirloom of some sort. Raises attack power with lower equipment load. The dancer in blue represents a fairy, who in legend bestowed a flowing sword upon a blind swordsman. Blade in hand, the swordsman sealed away an ancient god, a god that was rot itself. This is very interesting, and quite frankly, confusing. This item received for defeating a boss like the Guardian Golem, just what does this talisman have to do with the surrounding area? The Shamshir and the Blue Dancer charm are highly associated with Millicent and Melina, but what does this all have to do with the Guardian Golems? We'll leave this puzzle alone for the moment. Let's get back to the surface, to Morne Castle. There isn't much to say about the Golem Archer guarding Morne Castle. Upon defeat, there is a chance it will drop the Golem Greatbow, a great bow of black stone crafted by a civilization now gone to ruin. Extremely heavy, this great bow requires enormous strength just to draw, suggesting it was not intended for human use. There is an incredibly important item at Morne Castle too, the Grafted Greatsword. One might say the golem is standing guard at the castle's lift entrance in order to stop anyone trying to enter and steal the treasured sword. Unfortunately, it would appear that the golem, or whoever ordered the golem to stand guard here, never anticipated the attack coming from inside the castle itself. Once we've defeated Godric the Grafted, we'll eventually head to the Divine Bridge in Limgrave, which is guarded by none other than 3 Guardian Golems, 2 golems wielding halberds at the beginning of the bridge, and 1 golem with a great bow at the rear providing ranged support. This trio presents a reasonable challenge in the early game, but ultimately they're made easy foes by bringing them close together and letting them do all the work for you. The Golem Archer has a chance to drop the Golem's Great Arrows, a great arrow of black stone crafted by a civilization now gone to ruin, used by the Guardian Golem. This hefty arrow is enrobed with tempestuous winds, allowing it to break enemy stances and guards with ease. It would appear that the Guardian Golems are employing the use of the tempestuous winds of Stormvale. Even the design of the arrow's feathers resemble bird wings, and moving to the other side of the bridge through the portal, there are heaps of golems where many eagles and stormhawks are perched on the golem's remains. There are many distinct ruins found throughout the lands between. The architecture of the Divine Towers and the Divine Bridges does seem to differ to that of the ruins of Farum, and the ancient arches and pillars found along the southern cliffs of Limgrave and Caelid also appear distinct from these two. Additionally, when we think of other ancient ruins in the game, the Ould Palace ruins come to mind, the very same type as found in the Siofra Riverwell, and even these are distinct from other ruins as well. So we have 4 unique types of architecture associated with different times and different cultures in the lands between. The ruins we find underground, as well as the Ould Palace ruins, are that of the ancient dynasty. The chunks of ruins with ruined fragments and the occasional sanctuary stones, they're associated with Farum Great Bridge, the Bestial Sanctum, and Farum Azula. The Divine Bridges and Divine Towers are most closely associated with Leyndell and the Erd Tree. And finally, that leaves the arches and pillars that we find throughout Limgrave, Caelid, and the Mountaintops of the Giants. The society that built these arches and pillars isn't clear to us initially, so we'll have to come back to this as we gather more of our evidence. The Tower of Return in the south of the Weeping Peninsula transports us to the Divine Bridge in Leyndell, although this bridge is now almost completely destroyed, and the Divine Tower with which it was linked is now sealed away, or so it would seem. The tower that this bridge is likely associated with is the tower where Rykard's Great Rune is kept, and given Rykard's reputation as a blasphemous and power-hungry demigod, it makes sense to me that this bridge has been completely cut off from the tower. When we approach the bridge, none other than a Guardian Golem is lying there, and it awakens to attack us when we approach. This golem is a bit tougher than the ones most players will have encountered by now, and given the small combat area, this fight can present some challenges. This golem is certainly placed in a very significant location, and given the placement of other golems we've seen thus far, it appears that they're guarding extremely important areas, either for progression or for lore implications, such as the golem guarding Morne Castle, the Divine Towers, and the Golem Archer guarding the Ainsel River Well. So the significance of this golem is interesting. First off, it is the sole golem that we find in all of Liurnia, and it's guarding the entrance to the lift leading down to the Ainsel River, which, from what we've gathered so far, the underground areas do not have a whole lot to do with the Guardian Golems. Except when you start to go down a rabbit hole and realize that the Ainsel River is explicitly linked to the legend of the Blind Swordsman and the ancient god of Rot, which is referenced by the Blue Dancer charm, dropped by the golem in Highroad Cave. But that's a topic I'm going to try to avoid in the spirit of keeping this video on topic. At the very least, we can chalk up another example of the Guardian Golems guarding some of the most significant locations in the game. When it comes to the rest of Liurnia, there isn't a whole lot to mention about the Guardian Golems. However, a strong link between the golems and this sunken lake exists once you take a closer look. Liurnia is where players will get access to the cracked crystal material. This material is used to make crystal darts. These darts are a useful tool for dealing magic damage, but they have a neat secondary effect on certain enemies. When struck with enough crystal darts, stone imps, catacomb watchdogs, and guardian golems will short-circuit and become frenzied, attacking everything in the path, friend or foe. Let's take a look at the item description for the crystal darts. It reads, throwing knife chiseled from impure crystal. Long ago, it is said that a golem crafter employed a similar crystal tool. This is exceedingly interesting for our purposes of discovering who it was that created the Guardian Golems. It would appear that whoever crafted the imps and watchdogs also crafted the Guardian Golems. Let's keep looking at crystal items. Next up, the crystal knife. Its description reads, a knife made by sharpening hard crystal. Signature weapon of the glintstone miners. Used as a tool to extract glintstone from broken rock, and as such, a faint magic enwreathes the blade. The use of the term tool is very significant to me. It would appear that this might be the very tool that was referenced in the crystal dart item description. If we follow this line of thought further, we get to the crystal sword. Its item description reads as follows. Sword fashioned from pure crystal, a deed impossible for a human. Wreathed with powerful magic, its attack scales with intelligence. The inscrutable Crystallians have but one clear purpose, to safeguard their crystal unto the end. One theory posits that they yearn for the return of their creator, who will carve for them new brethren. So, now we have made the jump from impure crystal to pure crystal, and it would appear that this is something impossible for humans to craft according to the description. The crystal staff reads similarly, stating, staff fashioned from pure crystal, a deed impossible for a human. Enhances Crystallian sorceries. The Crystallian's faint cognition is known as the wisdom of the stone. This staff can only be wielded by those of intellect high enough to grasp such wisdom. Similar to the crystal sword, it would appear that the Crystallians themselves are the ones who crafted this item. It should be noted that the Crystallians are not affected by crystal darts. Additionally, other constructs such as the Iron Virgins and Marionette and Avionette soldiers are also not affected by crystal darts. To me, this indicates that the short-circuiting happens when the impure crystal material of the crystal dart interacts with the stone materials that the golems are made of. The Crystallians are made of pure crystal, the Iron Virgins are made of metal, and the Marionette and Avionette soldiers appear to be made of a mixture of wooden and metal materials, so they're all unaffected by the impure crystal material. The origins of those constructs, however, will have to be the topic of another video. Before we get back to the Guardian Golems, I wanted to mention something about the frenzied effect we see above the heads of the golems when they're hit with crystal darts. When we venture into the Shiofa River, we can acquire a very unique spell that offers us some insight into one of the land's between's earliest civilizations. When we acquire the Oracle Bubbles sorcery, we learn that it is a sorcery of claymen, who served as priests in the ancient dynasty. Produces several small magical bubbles that drift towards foes before they naturally pop. Charging increases the delay before the bubbles pop. The claymen search for lost oracles within their bubbles. The small bubbles mentioned in this spell description seem to be indicative of a very ancient type of magic, and as it turns out, those bubbles seem to appear above the heads of imps, guardian watchdogs, and the guardian golems that have been short-circuited with crystal darts. These same blue-colored bubbles, as it would appear, float above their heads when they are in this state of frenzy. Getting back to the guardian golems, the next area of interest we're going to look at is in Caelid. Specifically when you reach the surface of the Shiofer River well by unlocking the imp statue. These golems are equipped with magic arrows and deal a massive magical explosion upon impact. The item description for Golem's magic arrow reads, "Great arrow of black stone crafted by a civilization now gone to ruin, imbued with its ancient magic." This item description is very significant, short as it may be, because it offers us yet one more clue as to which civilization it was that crafted these constructs. Interestingly, we also find a bunch of grabblestone and the spiked palisade shield near this first archer golem, suggesting this golem and a smaller companion may have faced down an ancient dragon at this location, perhaps even repelling it from reaching the Colosseum. Speaking of the Colosseum, these two archers guard the Great Jar, probably one of the most enigmatic and mysterious entities in Elden Ring. Just one more example of these constructs guarding extremely significant locations throughout the Lands Between. However, there is one more golem in Caelid that I want to talk about, this one hidden and well off the beaten path, but we'll come back to this golem a little bit later when I start getting into exactly which civilization I think it was that created the golems. For now, we're going to head back into Liurnia to the ruin-strewn Precipice. The ruin-strewn Precipice is probably one of my favorite areas in the game, not only because of its awesome views and epic scale, but because of the absolute treasure trove of lore that resides in these ruins. As we approach from the river below, we can see the ruins above, and when we ascend the lift, we find here the same ruined architecture we found throughout Limgrave, Caelid, and later on in the Mountaintops of the Giants. Looking at some of the finer details, the place is riddled with green glintstone, the very same type that's found in the Rayo Lucaria crystal tunnel, where we can find cracked crystal, the material made to use crystal darts. A lone glintstone miner is found toiling away at some of these crystals. Giant bats and chanting winged dames are found here as well, similarly to how we find them in the Highroad cave. These bats are also usually found in dark areas, but can also very commonly be found scattered throughout the ancient arches and pillars found in Limgrave, Caelid, and the Mountaintops. The song of the chanting winged dames is sung in Latin, and the Elden Ring lore community has translated the lyrics. One of the more interesting lore items found within these ruins is the Serpent God's curved sword. Its item description reads, "Curved sword fashioned in the image of an ancient deity and tool of a forgotten religion practiced on Mount Gelmir. Formerly used to offer up sacrifices, this sword restores HP upon slaying an enemy." If we're to take the presence of this weapon as contemporaneous with the ruins in which it's found, this would suggest that the ancient civilization that built these ruins, along with all the other ruined arches and pillars throughout Limgrave, Caelid, and the Mountaintops, it suggests that they worshiped the ancient serpent deity, or maybe they just had members in amongst them that did so. Alternatively, this may have just been an unlucky member of the recusants from Volcano Manor. But once we make it to the boss arena for the ruins, you'll see that it bears a striking resemblance to the boss arena found within the Highroad cave. And this boss arena is definitely one of the most serene locations in Elden Ring, in my opinion, and truly one of my favorite boss fights, by employing the help of Tragoth and Blackguard to take down this massive magma worm. Moving up the lift from the ruin-strewn Precipice, we find a rather peculiar sight. Dozens, maybe hundreds of discarded coffins stacked and piled. Omen are patrolling the area, some of them dozing on top of the heaps of coffins. And something I noticed on just this playthrough, in fact, more heaps of destroyed Guardian Golems. And this might be one of the largest collections of destroyed golems in the game. The implications of this are a bit mysterious to me. Were these golems used as soldiers during the shattering? And why are there so many coffins piled up here? At the south end of the Altus Plateau, a Guardian Golem duo stands guard at the lift of Dectus. What's interesting about these golems is that they're standing guard as though they're there to stop anyone from descending the lift. If we proceed from the discarded coffins, we may meet Millicent at the Erdtree Gazing Hill, where she mentions the Shaded Castle and a prosthesis. Once we venture to the area, we'll find off to the side Mali Marai amongst the field of statues, but also, very surprisingly, a Guardian Golem rises to assist him in fighting us. Mali is a personal worshipper of Millennia, and the Scarlet Rod inside her, and given her connections to the Blind Swordsman, it is extremely intriguing that we also find a Guardian Golem here as well. Once again, we've stumbled across an instance where these two subjects appear related, but just tangentially so. There isn't much to say about these three golems guarding the entrance to Leyndell, other than they're here yet again guarding one of the most significant locations in the game. It's a fun fight that sets the tone for the real guard of the city, the Draconic Tree Sentinel. Now, one of my absolute favorite moments in the entire game is when we're crossing this extremely narrow passage to get to the greater parts of the Mountaintops of the Giants. These giant blocks always struck me as a little odd, and they almost look like they could be discarded coffins. And the Guardian Golem sniping us from the other side of the bridge is amazing. This sequence looks incredible, and it leads to the ruins of our ancient civilization in question. Here, we finally come to the Mountaintops of the Giants, where the golems and the ancient arches and pillars come together, and start to give us a better idea of just who it was that built these automatons. Throughout this corridor, there are several golems walking around, presumably guarding the lower areas of this frozen river. If we wander over to the western part of the river, there is even a massive heap of golems piled up. It is clear that the golems were abundant in this area, far more so than they were now. In fact, thinking about the sheer amount of destroyed golems we've seen throughout the game, the golems' numbers have dwindled immensely from the time that they were built to when we arrive. This area is one of the most intact and uninterrupted areas of these ruins. There are 3 massive bridges still intact, and a lot of these walls and pillars are complete in a way we just don't see throughout the rest of the lands between. Nestled atop these arches and columns is the Stargazer ruins. This place was built atop the pillars and arches to get as close to the night sky as possible. Here, we can complete Aurelia's mini-quest and receive the primal glintstone blade. We can also access Heretic's Rise from an ancient invisible bridge where we find the Founding Reign of Stars spell. Its description reads, "The eldest primeval sorcery, said to have been discovered by an ancient astrologer. A sorcery of legendary status, thought to be the founding glintstone sorcery. The glimpse of the primeval current that the astrologers saw became real, and the stars' amber rained down on this land." The astrologers certainly have a long and storied past in the Mountaintops, according to the lore. My theory is that the ruined arches, pillars, and bridges we see here in the Mountaintops of the Giants, Caelid, and Limgrave were built to aid the astrologers in their efforts to reach as close to the night sky as possible and to better read the fates written in the stars. But certainly, these primal glintstone sorcerers could not have achieved these architectural marvels without the help of some skilled craftsman, right? We need look no further than the Sword of Night and Flame. Found in Caria Manor, this item all but spells out the Carians' associations with the astrologers. Its item description reads, "Storied sword and treasure of Caria Manor. One of the legendary armaments. Astrologers, who preceded the sorcerers, established themselves in mountaintops that nearly touched the sky, and considered the fire giants their neighbors." From this description, it would appear that the fire giants and the astrologers were not in conflict with each other, but the exact opposite, in fact. The sword harnesses the power of both of their cultures, suggesting they worked in tandem to create it, and possibly other creations as well. It's really starting to look like the Astrologers and the Fire Giants could have been the ones that not only built these arches and pillars throughout the lands between, but they could have been the ancient civilization, now gone to ruin, that also constructed the Guardian Golems too. Speaking of the Fire Giants, there doesn't appear to be many structures left in the lands between that are associated with the Giants. In fact, it would seem like there almost aren't any. The one place we can look is the Forge of the Giants at Flame Peak. The basin itself is a work of mastery, intricately designed and divinely inspired. And if we take a look at how the forge itself is supported, it rests atop none other than our ancient pillars, the very same we see throughout Limgrave, Caelid, and the Mountaintops as well. This, to me, is a crystal clear indication that these arches and pillars are the work of the Fire Giants, and in turn, the Astrologers. I also believe that the Guardian Golems were crafted by the Fire Giants, and their weapons were imbued with the ancient magic of the Astrologers. The two Golem archers in Caelid appear to be employing the use of this ancient magic in their great arrows. But the other Golem I mentioned that resides in Caelid, this one, off the beaten path, guarding nothing, it too is equipped with ancient magic. The Golem on the cliffs of the Wailing Dunes is probably the most formidable Guardian Golem in the whole game. It has really consistent damage. It tracks your movement very well. Its attack speed seems like it might be quicker than the other Golems. It has a crap ton of hit points, and it deals magic damage thanks to its magic-infused halberd. Not to mention the incredibly awesome animation of its ancient magic 3-sphere comet attack. These beams of magic almost appear like lesser versions of Comet Azure from the way a beam of magic fires from these floating magic orbs. This Golem, along with the Archer Golems in Caelid, give us some of the last contextual clues we have about the Guardian Golems and who it was that built them. After going through all of this evidence and contextual circumstances, I think I'm finally ready to lay out my theory in full. I believe that the Fire Giants are the ones who created the Guardian Golems using the Forge of the Giants and their divine smithing capabilities. Once the Golems were built, their weapons were imbued with the magical powers harnessed by the Astrologers. These Golems were constructed to serve as the standing army of the Fire Giants and the Astrologers, a practice that continues on in various forms throughout Carian history and at Raya Lucaria. It would seem that the Guardian Golems might be the very first form of artificial life that was created in the lands between. They are magical stone soldiers, in essence, forged through a divine rite. As to what happened after the fall of their civilization, it would appear that the Golems were used in many wars and battles throughout the Shattering, and perhaps well before. They are found widely throughout the lands between, and it appears like their last remaining purpose is to guard locations of great importance, perhaps now controlled and ordered by America. Ultimately, it seems like we arrive in the lands between to witness the very end of the Guardian Golems, these last remaining constructs from an ancient civilization, now gone to ruin. So, even after all that, there are still so many questions. What happened between the Astrologers and the Fire Giants? How do we explain the vast geographic distances between the Mountaintops of the Giants and Caelid, and furthermore Limgrave, despite their obvious connections? What is the connection between the Guardian Golems and the Blue Dancer charm? What does the Blind Swordsman and the Ancient God of Rot have to do with the Fire Giants and the Astrologers? Could the blue bubbles we see above the Golems' heads when they're frenzied with crystal darts be the same bubbles in the sorceries of the ancient dynasty? These are all questions I still don't have answers to. I feel like one of the most significant threads in this topic is the presence of the Golem alongside Molly Marai at the Shaded Castle. That location really ties together the Golems and the legend of the Blue Dancer charm So depending on how well this video does, and maybe how interested you, the viewers, are in seeing that, I may follow up this video with a video diving further into that side of the lore. But for now, I feel like I've done a decent job of presenting my findings and putting out a pretty solid theory as to the origins of the Guardian Golems and the ruins of Limgrave, Caelid, and the Mountaintops. So, go ahead and comment below if there was something you feel like I missed, or if you have something you wanted to share or expound upon, or present alternate theories to who it was that built the golems. I would love to hear what you all have to say. I know this video had a ton of information packed into it, so if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it a lot. I know I definitely missed some things and probably put too much emphasis on some things while not emphasizing more important things enough to make my points. This video essay is a mess, to be sure. I may then end up doing a follow-up video to talk about some extra things I missed, or maybe even some corrections or developments or changes in my theories. But I can definitely put this topic to rest now. I've wanted to make this video because its theory has just been living in my head rent-free for a while now, and I consume a fair bit of Elden Ring lore content, so I'm really happy I finally finished this and I can post it and put it out there and contribute to the lore hunting community. So, thanks again for watching. Have a great day. Peace. I think I'm gonna go play some Elden Ring.